I found out about a developmental pediatrician in the neighborhood, and she diagnosed them as PDD-NOS, which is a form of autism. They'd be able to travel on their own, go to the city on their own, and basically be happy and live productive lives just like everybody else. But because of the housing situation on Long Island, we've not been able to secure the appropriate type of housing for them.
Welcome everyone to Family Comes First. I'm Vincent J. Russo.
And I'm Victoria Roberts-Drogin. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're talking about our children with special needs and how to care for them when they reach adulthood.
Victoria, I believe we are on the verge of a crisis. As a society, we have not dealt with how we take care of our young adults with special needs. Where will they live?
Last season, we met with 7-year-old Alejandro Blanco and his family. Today we will meet with Millie Alpert, who has twin adult sons who are on the autism spectrum. Millie must find a way to take care of her sons and find a way for them to be taken care of when she can no longer do it.
Thank goodness we have experts who can help navigate these waters. Quite a challenge, but there are resources. Joining us now are Christine Austin, Adult Services Coordinator of the School for Language and Communication Development, SLCD, and Deanna Eble of my law firm, Vincent J. Russo and Associates. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Christine, we're in a crisis that is facing parents of adult children with disabilities. How did we get here? What does this look like?
Well, currently right now in the state of New York, there is a moratorium on residential housing on Long Island, New York State. There is potentially roughly 2,500 individuals who are on waiting lists for residential housing placements.
Wait, can you repeat that number? How many?
Approximately 2,500 names are on the waiting list, just for New York State alone.
So how long might someone be on a waiting list?
They could be on a waiting list for years, I would assume.
And what do they do while they're waiting?
I guess as best as they can do. At this point, we have individuals who are in out-of-state placements, so they are in New York State, but they are remaining at their school placements right now, and they're awaiting placements on Long Island or New York. And some of these adult individuals are home with their parents and their families.
Would you say the majority are home?
I would say the majority are home.
So the parents have to be struggling. I know it's hard enough taking care of a young child with special needs, but when someone is older and perhaps they have different needs and physically they're bigger.
Absolutely.
And it's more difficult to take care of them. You're saying, well, I need to plan for my child when he or she is older, and this 12 or 13 or 15-year-old that I love and am taking care of in my own home, and I'm being asked at the same time to put them on a list.
I could see parents not wanting to.
Yeah, yeah. And what would you say to the parent who's hesitant?
You know, I would look to other, there are support groups out there for families through the Long Island DDSO, and they can talk to families who've been on this list and when they started the process. And certainly there's our organization offers parent training and transition training as well. So we're one of the agencies on Long Island that can help parents with this process.
So it doesn't happen immediately. When you put your child on a list, there's a time period.
Well, 2,500 people are on waiting lists.
Maybe, maybe the fear is that if I put my child on a list next week, they're moving out, and that's not the case?
And that's not reality. And I think that is the first and foremost thing that needs to be strengthened is education and information for parents. Parents need to be able to access that information more readily or be given that information.
So it's a double challenge. On the one hand, you have educating the parents as to the resources that are out there so that they're not afraid to access them. And on the other hand, you have to actually build the resources.
Now, if a parent places a child on a waiting list, are they forced to accept the housing when it does come up?
No. But what happens is that if a housing placement does come up, say there's a house in Nassau County that is available, first and foremost you have to make sure it's appropriate for your son or daughter. And 9 times out of 10 it's not necessarily the appropriate placement. You know, there's a lot of factors that go into place of placing an individual into a residential home.
Who makes that decision? How is that assessment done?
Well, different agencies on Long Island and Nassau and Suffolk County, they own, obviously they own residential homes. So a parent would go to, you know, would go to an agency and basically show their interest. Obviously their son or daughter's name is on the list. Once a placement did become available, then the parent would be contacted, their Medicaid service coordinator would be contacted to go and screen, so to speak, for this placement.
So it's on behalf of the child.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned children who were in high school. All right, so I guess that brings us to maybe some legal questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Deanna, from a legal perspective, what should parents be doing for a child as they approach age 18?
I think that the biggest misconception out there, or the thing parents aren't necessarily thinking about as their children are approaching 18, is that at age 18 they don't have any legal right to make financial and healthcare decisions for their child.
Wait a second, I've been taking care of my child all these years. Now you're saying I don't have the authority?
No, because they're considered the age of majority at 18, and so they're supposed to have their own authority. And so once they're about 17, you should start considering, or the parent should start considering, whether or not they think that child would be able to understand enough to make their own decisions. Because if that's the case, when they turn 18, they'd contact an attorney and have a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy executed so that the child can name the parent and, you know, other standbys or other agents to make those decisions for them when they need it.
Now, why would that be important?
Because without that, in a healthcare scenario, if the parent doesn't agree with the course of treatment, they really have to prove that it's in the child's best interest to do something else. So you want to have the authority to make those decisions, because if you don't have the authority, it's more of an uphill battle.
So there could be a problem in a medical crisis where the hospital is disagreeing with the parents, and the parents don't have the legal authority to say to the hospital, yes, do this surgery, don't do this surgery.
Correct. So if they had a healthcare proxy, that would give the parents the legal authority to make that decision. And the reason why you start considering that before the child is 18 is because if the child turns 18 and they don't have the requisite capacity to make decisions and understand for themselves, you want to start a guardianship, and that guardianship should really be started at least 6 months before the child turns 18, so it's a seamless transition.
Now, what about other government benefits like SSI?
When the child turns 18, they would be able to qualify, most children would be able to qualify for a government stipend, a monthly stipend under SSI, which is an income of approximately $800. And the reason why 18 is the age that we look at is because at age 18 for that particular program, they don't deem the parent's assets and income as part of the child's assets and income, meaning included for the child. And so because they don't do that, most children don't have the resources to put them over any max that government benefit allows for, and they'll qualify for the benefit.
So that $800 could be really important to help pay for living expenses for that child who may never be able to work in the workforce.
Right. Somebody to come in and help them, you know, get dressed in the morning. The little things that the parents are getting right now, they could get that little extra one-on-one with the extra money that they're bringing in.
Now, how does Medicaid play into this? While the child's growing up, they're going to be covered with educational services, and they'll get therapies if they need it inside the educational program. But what happens when they're past the age of coverage? I think it's age 22.
Right. So parents, again, you always want to be a little bit more proactive. So as the children are 21 and getting ready to graduate from high school and come out of those educational programs, parents should be working with somebody to get their children on Medicaid, because as Christine was saying, some of these residential housing programs, they require you to be on Medicaid to get into those different programs and take advantage of the housing or have daycare services and stuff like that. And if you don't have Medicaid started, then when they time out of the educational programs, it's a process. So it could take months to get them into something else.
So there's a gap.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why it's always better to give yourself a good 6 months to step into it so it's seamless.
Currently, I can give you an example of what we do. We have a high school in Richmond Hill where we're graduating, obviously, 21-year-olds from the program, and we're providing the support and the training to the parents. So it's really, really important. My number one tip would be for parents is to understand what is to come. As hard and complicated as it might be, it's really, really important to be organized and focused on of what's to come after 21. So
education, as you said, it's getting the parents educated. Yeah.
Critical.
Thank you both so much for being here and sharing your insights and your expertise.
When we come back, we will sit down with Millie Alpert and see how she manages taking care of her twins with autism. Stay with us.
I realized that something was different when they were about 3 years old and they weren't speaking conversational speech. Also, when we went to play groups, they didn't socialize well with the other children. I had to intervene in order for them to socialize, or one would just sit on my lap while everybody else was playing in the basement. They played with toys appropriately, but again, they didn't socialize and they didn't have that conversational exchange. And my daughter at 18 months had spoken like an adult. So we were concerned about them, but we had gone to pediatricians and they said that it was normal and it was twinning and, that the speech would come along. At 4 years old, I became quite upset that they weren't speaking appropriately for their age. My first steps to get a diagnosis was I found out about a developmental pediatrician in the neighborhood. So I brought the boys there, and she diagnosed them after testing them several times as PDD-NOS, which is a form of autism. When the family first heard the diagnosis, they were in shock. They could not believe it because the boys were odd. They spoke, but yet they didn't speak conversationally. They were able to make demands and tell you what they wanted, and they spoke to each other. But again, they were a little bit different. And we had never had that diagnosis in our family, so everybody was very unfamiliar with what that meant exactly. So I called my sister-in-law, and she had a friend whose daughter or son was at SLCD, which is the School for Language and Communication Development, and that was in North Belmore at that time. And I called the school, and they said that they would screen them. And they definitely fit the criteria for that program. I loved the school. It was upbeat, optimistic. Dr. Tiegemann was wonderful. She had all the hope for everybody and everyone's future. And she was just wonderful. And she accepted them at 4 years, 4 months. She said, it was November, and she said, "Pilgrim, your search has ended." I remember it as if it was today. And the boys attended there, and she said, "You know what, Millie, you're lucky because at 5 years old, it's more difficult to teach children, appropriate language skills. The door sort of closes." And she said that, you can intervene after that and you can teach them compensatory skills, but you're not going to change them neurologically at that point. So I felt relieved, lucky, just happy.
We are talking today about how to take care of adults with autism,
which present unique challenges for family caregivers. With us now is Millie Alpert, a caring and loving parent of twin sons, Brian and Chris. She also has a daughter. Both of her twins are on the autism spectrum, but fortunately high functioning. Thank you for being here.
Welcome,
I'm
Millie.
glad to be here today.
We're very happy to have you.
Thank you.
So, Millie, your older daughter, Nina, is how old?
She's 31.
Wow.
And
Good for
she's
you.
married. She lives in Westchester, Pennsylvania with her husband.
Oh, very
She
nice.
got married 2 years ago.
Nice. And Brian and Chris, how old are they today?
28, and they live at home with me and their father.
So there are some challenges, I would imagine, in living with your boys at home. Young men, really.
Right.
at
Well,
home.
now they're young adults. They'd like to be mainstream. They'd like to be on their own and independent. But because of the housing situation on Long Island, we've not been able to secure the appropriate type of housing for them so that they can live on their own.
So what steps are you trying to take? Like, what would you like to see happen?
Well, the first step that I took was to go to meetings at the Developmental Disabilities Regional Office on housing. The programs were given by the Disabilities Opportunities Fund, and it suggested that parents get together and try to set up housing for their developmentally disabled young adults independently of the state, basically, or the system, with some aid from the state. So at this point, I had met a family. They had set up a house in Huntington where my boys would like to live, but the funding is difficult to get for rent. And this is where I am right now, writing proposal letters to this office and to the director, Jacqueline Best, as well as several other people that she works with, trying to get rent money, or what they call individual support service grants, so that they can live on their own.
So if they were to transition into that type of setting, what would the challenges be for them?
Oh, there would be lots of challenges, because right now at home, they're familiar with everything. They're familiar with the neighborhood. They can walk to places to eat. Chris works at Rosicki and Rosicki, which is on East Bethpage Road, which is very close to the house. He could even walk there. My other son volunteers at Somerset Gardens, which is an assisted living. He can walk there. They don't really cook at home much. I mean, they'll make lunch, but basically I'm in charge of dinner and sometimes breakfast. They don't really do their laundry at home, because when Chris was doing it, he broke both of our machines. So we had to buy new ones, so now he's kind of banned from using them. But
Can I get banned in my house?
Yeah. Finances, they have to learn how to handle finances.
Right.
Yeah.
They have to learn how to food shop more and really take care of themselves.
So there's a big learning curve when they would transition.
Definitely, and that's going to take years.
Yeah.
It's not, you see, with the developmentally disabled autistic, they have to be taught everything. So you have to teach it, but it takes time for them to assimilate it and for it to become part of their routine.
But it sounds like they want to.
They do want to. They desperately want to be mainstream. When they were little, they were mainstreamed in school, in blended classes or inclusion programs, started basically by myself and the Special Education PTA in Plainview. So they desperately want to be in the mainstream. They desperately want to be independent. And that's what we're working towards. My husband and I are working towards that today. In fact, I'm even working with Senator Kemp Hannon's office
Oh,
on this.
Yeah, you really are cutting edge in terms of showing other parents how to start planning early so you're not caught short. Let's talk about the boys for a minute, Millie. Tell us about their personalities. How are they different? I mean, they're twins, so they...
They're identical twins, but they're very different.
Okay.
Brian is definitely the alpha male, the leader. If he needs something done, I mean, when they were younger, he used to rush his brother to do his homework because they were both on teams in high school, and then he would copy it. So this is, he's really in charge. He really is.
Are they in any programs right now?
Right now they have a friend named Irving, and they go together to YAI Broader Horizons, which is a recreational program.
If you could paint the perfect picture for them, living independently, what would it look like?
They'd both be working. They'd both be living on their own. Chris would be driving. He does drive. He has a license.
Okay.
But he'd be driving back and forth to work. They'd be able to travel on their own, go to the city on their own, and basically be happy and live productive lives just like everybody else.
Absolutely. It's what every mom wants for their kids, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've been to many, many conferences in Manhattan, etc., and everyone says the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
They just want for their children with disabilities the same thing that they want for their typical children.
Sure.
Right.
Of course.
Now, while you're working on this transition, and I know it's cutting edge here in New York, and there's going to be a lot of zigs and zags, I think, as you maneuver through the system as well. What could you do today to help prepare them for that transition? Are you taking steps actively while they're living at home with you? You mentioned several of those challenges that they have, or are there programs out there that could help them with better, understanding of money, or how to take care of themselves with the laundry or
Cooking.
Cooking.
Well, right now, they, I pretty much leave them on their own a lot. For example, this morning they have a dentist appointment. So the only thing I'll do is write a note saying you have a dentist appointment at 12 o'clock or whatever, and they're responsible for getting themselves there. Also,
Great.
they're responsible because when I go to work, I don't make lunch or breakfast for them. They're responsible to do that for themselves.
It sounds like you're a teacher. By the way, are you a teacher?
How did you guess? And actually, I was their primary teacher for most of the years that they were in school.
Right.
Because they got a lot from school and a lot of one-on-one attention, but they needed that much more to get the more difficult courses to graduate high school.
Sure, sure.
So it was a challenge for them
Sure.
all through the years.
What tips would you give other parents out there who have young adult children living at home and you're just trying to think about what their future may be out there in the next handful of years or even more long term? What tips would you give to those parents?
I would say continue to network. Don't give up, because when you're in school, you have a large system or large amount of professionals and parents that you can speak to and communicate with and learn from. When your children become adults, just as they become isolated, you become isolated. Because now you no longer have that network of support.
Interesting.
So I would say you have to keep networking. You have to keep finding out what's new. You can go on the internet. You can join the Asperger's Foundation. You need to stay current, and you need to see what's going on all the time, and you need to always think one step ahead.
Yeah. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your children and your story, and I just love the advocacy and you being so proactive with your children. I'm sure they're living great lives, and in large part due to your efforts. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I just want to see them, as I said, on their own, and then I will feel totally successful in the end.
Great.
Well, we wish you all the best with that, and I'm sure they'll get there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we turn to Monsignor McNamara for a spiritual reflection.
The mom in this story is just terrific. Millie is so calm and caring as she speaks about her twin boys. Every parent wants their children to be perfect, and every parent fears any interruption in this normal process of growth. Gradually, Millie notices that her sons are not socializing properly, and then at 4 years old, they are not speaking clearly. What a dreadful feeling this must be. In my parish, there are twin boys who are on the autism spectrum, as is true in this story. The 2-year-olds in my parish are absolutely delightful, and because their mother has fought so hard for them, they have received early assistance and attention. There are a couple of things worth noting here. First, it is important to speak of autism as a spectrum, not simply as a static category. There are degrees of autism. Second, the earlier a child receives help, the more promising will their future be. The children in this story get to the right person at 4 years and 4 months. Millie is given the welcome news that their search is ended and her boys do well. Thanks be to God.
So, Vincent, having met with Millie and heard her story, and having spoken with Christine and Deanna and heard about the resources that are actually available out there, this is your field. You know, you deal with families in crisis and families with these needs all the time. What would your recommendation be to parents who are facing this oncoming age where their children are not of the same status that they were legally?
Yeah. I think it comes down to parents being proactive. Mm-hmm. They really need to take steps not only to deal with what's in front of them today, yes, and what the needs are and the issues, but what's going to happen in the future. And it's very hard because they're overwhelmed. But sure, that's the message I would give. Parents need to be proactive. They need to be the spokesperson for their loved one. They need to understand what the resources are. They need to reach out to attorneys who are special needs planners, mm-hmm, who can really sit with them and say, okay, here's a pathway that you can go down and you can get through in a very successful way for your child, and you can navigate the waters, so to speak. Right. But it's all comes down to being proactive.
So, in essence, it's not enough to simply care for your child in the moment. You have to educate yourself as to what's coming and how to deal with it.
Well said. Children become adults.
Yes.
Children with special needs become adults.
With special needs,
absolutely,
yes. And it's becoming more common to have a child on the autism spectrum. And thankfully, there's awareness and resources that are becoming more and more available for children who grow into adults.
That's right. But what we learned today is that we need to be focusing in on the children who become adults. Mm-hmm. Not only the younger children. That's right. And we really, as a society, have to deal with this housing issue. It is so important. I mean, the good news is we have family, friends, and resources that can help.
Right. For a list of these resources and the legal services that are available, please visit Vincent's law firm website at vjrussolaw.com.
Thank you. With the support of these resources, adults with autism can live long, happy lives. Thanks to our viewers for joining us, and remember, family truly does come first.